We welcome you back to this channel. In this video, we will explore encounters with the dead, where the protagonists interact with deceased people without knowing it. These stories will make you question the boundaries between life and death. Go ahead, turn off the lights, and let's take one more step into the world of the unknown.
Nightly warning.
A few months ago, I moved to a small town in the mountains. I wanted to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and find a quiet place where I could focus on my writing. The town, with its old houses and cobblestone streets, seemed like something out of a storybook. The people were friendly, though a bit reserved, which was exactly what I was looking for. On the first day, as I was settling into my new home, I heard a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, I found a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a bun and dark, deep-set eyes. She introduced herself as Mary, my neighbor next door. She welcomed me and offered her help with anything I might need. I gratefully accepted her offer, and we spent a good while chatting about the town and its customs. Mary told me about her love for gardening and how she used to tend to the small garden in front of her house. Days passed, and as promised, Mary helped me get familiar with the place. She showed me the hiking trails, the best places to shop, and even invited me to her house for tea several times. We started to develop a pleasant routine, and soon, Mary became an invaluable friend. One afternoon, while we were having tea in her kitchen, Mary started talking about her late husband. She told me he had passed away a few years ago. Since then, she had been living alone in the house next door, and despite the sorrow, she had learned to live with his memory. I felt a lot of sadness in her voice as she recounted this. One night, while I was writing, I heard strange noises coming from Mary's house. When I looked out the window, I saw her in her garden, under the faint light of the moon, tending to her plants. I decided to go out and greet her. Mary was bent over a plant, whispering something to it. When I approached, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of desperation and sadness. "Are you all right, Mary?" I asked. "Everything is fine," she replied in a distant voice. "Just remember to keep the doors closed at night. You never know what might come in." That warning left me uneasy. When I returned to my house, I carefully closed all the doors and windows. The next day, I went to the town market to buy a few things. While paying, I mentioned Mary, and the shopkeeper, an older woman, looked at me in surprise. "Mary? The lady from the house next door?" she asked, and I nodded. "She passed away 2 weeks ago." I felt a chill run down my spine. "That can't be," I responded. "I was with her last night." The shopkeeper looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern, and she told me that Mary had died one afternoon while working in her garden. It was very sad for everyone, as she was much loved in the town. Confused and terrified, I rushed back to my house and ran to Mary's garden. Everything seemed normal, but the atmosphere was charged with a strange sense of unease. I decided to enter Mary's house. The door was slightly open, and when I stepped inside, I felt an intense cold. In the kitchen, I found the table set for tea, just as we had left it the night before. But there was something else, a framed photograph of Mary and her husband. The same expression of sadness I had seen on her face was reflected in the image. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard a soft whisper. "Remember to keep the doors closed at night." Fear paralyzed me, but I got up and closed all the doors and windows again. In the following days, Mary's presence became more palpable. I saw her in the garden, heard her whispering, and sometimes felt her presence in the house. I decided to investigate more about her death and discovered that it had been caused by a tragic accident. While tending to her plants, a loose beam from the pergola had collapsed on her. She died instantly. One night, as I was preparing to sleep, I saw her again in the garden. This time, her figure was more diffuse, almost transparent. She approached the window and, with a whisper I could barely hear, said, "Thank you for listening. Now I can rest." Since then, I never saw Mary again. Her house was sold and new neighbors moved in. But every time I pass by her garden, I feel a strange peace. I keep the doors closed at night, not out of fear, but in memory of a friend who taught me to value life and respect the unknown.
The Visit.
Ever since we were kids, my sister Anna and I have had a very close relationship. We shared a unique connection that went beyond siblinghood. We were best friends, confidants, and adventure companions. So when she called me one afternoon to say she was coming to visit, I couldn't contain my excitement. Even though we always kept in touch, it had been months since we last saw each other, and the idea of spending a few days with her filled me with joy. Anna arrived on a rainy night, her slender figure wrapped in a black coat. Her appearance surprised me a little. She looked paler and thinner than I remembered, but I attributed it to work stress since the last time we talked. She mentioned being very busy. We hugged at the door, and despite the cold night, her embrace felt strangely chilly. During the first few days, everything was as usual. We cooked together, watched our favorite movies, and chatted until the early hours of the morning. However, since she arrived, I couldn't help but notice something strange about her behavior. Anna used to be a very lively and energetic person, but now she seemed withdrawn and melancholy. Her eyes, usually bright and full of life, were dull and somber. One night, while I was preparing dinner, Anna was resting in the room. Suddenly, I heard her murmuring something in the living room. I quietly approached and saw her talking to herself, whispering words I couldn't understand. When she saw me, she immediately stopped talking and smiled, but her smile didn't seem natural. It had the appearance of someone doing it out of obligation. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, trying to sound casual and calm. "Oh, no one. I was just thinking out loud," she quickly responded, avoiding my gaze. The atmosphere in the house began to feel increasingly heavy. Strange noises echoed through the hallways in the middle of the night, and I felt a constant presence, as if someone else was there with us. One early morning, I woke up abruptly to a loud bang. When I stepped out of my room, I saw Anna standing in the hallway, staring intently into the darkness. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. She slowly turned towards me, her eyes empty and expressionless. "Don't worry about me," she said in a voice that wasn't hers, a voice that echoed unsettlingly. Panic began to invade my mind. I decided I had let too much time pass and that it was time to talk to her, to really find out what was going on. The next morning, while we were having coffee, I asked her directly, "Anna, I feel like something isn't right. What's going on?" She looked at me intently, her eyes filled with sadness. "There's something you need to know," she began. But before she could continue, the doorbell rang, interrupting her. I got up to answer and found 2 police officers at the door. My heart sank at the sight of their serious expressions. They wanted to know if they were looking for me and asked my name. I confirmed and asked what was going on and why they were there. I will never forget their words. "I'm very sorry, but we have to inform you that your sister, Anna Martin, died 3 days ago in a car accident." The officer's words echoed in my mind like a death sentence. I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. I told them it was a mistake. Anna was at home at that moment. I pointed inside. But when I turned around, she was no longer there. The house was empty. The officers looked at me with concern, but they couldn't understand what had happened. I slowly closed the door and walked to the living room. On the coffee table, the necklace Anna always wore rested on a piece of paper. Trembling, I picked up the paper and read the words written in my sister's handwriting. "Thank you for letting me say goodbye. I will always be with you." A chill ran down my spine as reality settled in my mind. Anna had come to say goodbye, to spend her last days with me, even though her body no longer belonged to this world. Since then, I sometimes feel her presence in the house, especially during stormy nights. I'm not alone, and although the idea should scare me, I find comfort in knowing that my sister will always be with me, watching over me from wherever she is.
The Last Promise.
Not long ago, I experienced something I still cannot comprehend. Whenever I recall it, a chill runs down my spine, and the feeling of being watched intensifies. What I'm about to tell you happened one winter night when I was returning to my hometown to attend the funeral of an old childhood friend, Robert. Years had passed since my last visit to the town. Everything looked the same, but there was a heavy air, as if time had stopped. After the wake, overwhelmed by memories, I decided to take a walk through the deserted streets to clear my mind. The fog was thick, and the streetlights barely managed to pierce the darkness with their weak, flickering light. As I walked, I heard a familiar voice calling my name. I turned around and saw Claire, a friend from my teenage years with whom I had lost contact more than 10 years ago. I was surprised to see her, but at the same time, I felt a strange joy at finding a familiar face. Claire looked exactly the same as the last time we met, her brown hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and her green eyes shining with that intensity that had always fascinated me. We talked for hours, wandering aimlessly through the empty streets. She told me she had recently returned to town and had been feeling very lonely. Her voice had a melancholic tone that made me promise her I wouldn't lose contact again, and that despite the busyness of life and work, we would stay in touch. Finally, we said goodbye in the central plaza, and she disappeared into the fog with a farewell that echoed in the darkness. The next day, still affected by the atmosphere of the previous night's conversation, I decided to visit the local library, a place where we used to spend hours studying and chatting in our youth. There, I met the librarian I had known in my youth, an older woman who recognized me immediately. After exchanging a few words, I asked her about Claire. She looked at me with an expression of disbelief. She told me that Claire had died 5 years ago in a bus accident. I couldn't believe what she was telling me. She kept talking, but honestly, I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter from the night before. Time seemed to stand still, my head was spinning, and I felt a heavy pressure all over my body. I told her about my encounter with Claire the previous night, but she just shook her head, assuring me that it was impossible. Confusion and fear began to take hold of me. Determined to find an explanation, I went to the cemetery. I walked among the graves, reading the names and dates until I reached Claire's headstone. There was her name, engraved in cold marble, along with the date of her death, 5 years ago. I knelt before her grave, feeling a mix of indescribable pain and terror. As I remained there, a cold breeze began to blow, whispering through the trees and filling the air with the scent of withered flowers. Suddenly, a shadow slid behind me. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. The atmosphere grew heavier, and I felt something approaching. Suddenly, I heard the whisper of a familiar voice, a whisper calling my name. It was Claire. Her voice resonated softly, but laden with infinite sadness. I stood up, trembling, and saw her figure appear among the shadows. Her face was pale, and her eyes, which once sparkled with life, were now 2 dark, empty voids. Suddenly, her voice echoed distantly. "I'm glad I saw you once more. I needed to say goodbye. Thank you for remembering me." With those words, her figure began to fade, as if it were mist dissipating in the wind. I tried to reach her, but my hands found only air. Since that day, I haven't been able to stop thinking about that night. Was it really Claire? Or did my mind play a cruel trick on me due to the pain of losing 2 close friends? I will never know for sure, but one thing is certain. The encounter with Claire reminded me that even in death, the bonds of friendship can endure beyond comprehension. Now every time I visit and pass through the central plaza, I look into the fog, hoping to see her figure once more. And though fear still accompanies me, so does the certainty that Claire found the peace she so longed for.
Thank you for journeying with us through the dark passages of these stories. If you enjoyed them, give us a like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more tales of terror. Until next time, where fear will once again be your companion.